Today, I am testing and comparing all 27 of these Overstable mid-ranges. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and yes, I have a cold. But never mind that, this is Flight Numbers Don't Matter. And yes, you heard me right, I will be throwing the discs today. But why am I testing the discs today and not Caleb, who usually throws all the shots in our video? Well, I'll answer that question with a question. You ever get out on the course and just feel like there's a shot missing from your bag? Well, I very much have that feeling right now, and it's a slot in between these two discs. My Eagle McMahon Prism Proton Envy is reliably overstable, and it's great for 200 to 230 foot shots that finish reliably but smoothly to the left. And then we have my Lucid Ice Orbit Bear, which around an 8 speed is great for pushing out to 300 feet or so, but I have to really give it some power to get there because it's pretty overstable for me. But that's fine, because that's what I want. However, I don't have anything for in between those discs, a mid-range that goes around 250 to maybe 270 feet and gets a little movement to the left. If I power up too hard on the Envy, I either turn it over or grip lock it. And if I power down on the Evader, I usually have an early release or miss my line. So, what's I gotta do? Well, it's not like I haven't been trying to figure this out. I've previously bagged this Discraft Malta, a Discmania MD5, a Discmania Mutant, and more than a few other discs for that sort of overstable mid-range slot. But the Malta and ESP plastic is just not as overstable as I expected, while the MD5 and the Mutant are just too overstable to be usable, for me anyways. Ideally, what I want is a reliably overstable mid-range that has some glide. I can count on it to hit a gap. Hopefully it gives me confidence when I pull it out of my bag. And it has a nice, reliable, low-speed fade. We've selected these supposedly overstable mid-ranges based on their flight numbers because that's what most players do. And hopefully through the course of our testing, we'll find out just how accurate some of those flight numbers are for my arm speed. Just before we get started though, I hope you're enjoying our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series. It's one of our favorites to make, but it is also the most work by far. So when this video is over, consider supporting us by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, backing us on Patreon, picking up a disc from our online store, sixsideddiscs.com, or even buying one of the actual mid-ranges we throw in today's video from our YouTube section on the site, and get 10% off because they are slightly used. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. And let's begin with a mid-range that I have already thrown, but in a different plastic. This is the Crystal Flex Malta. Now, if you've thrown a Discraft ESP Malta, you already know that the flight numbers of 5, 4, 1, 3 are a bit questionable. It just isn't that overstable. But today, we have the new Ledgestone Crystal Flex Malta. Might it provide a little more stability? Let's find out. Now, I am trying to throw all of these shots just about flat, and the Malta is pretty close. I'm pretty impressed with the Crystal Flex Malta. It has that little bit more stability than the ESP, so it's an early contender, and I'm going to have to add it to our shortlist. Next, let's take a look at another offering from Discraft, the Wasp. Rated at 5302, we have the Wasp in two different plastics today. Z, their translucent premium plastic, and a Ledgestone CT blend, which stands for Crazy Tough. It's a super stiff base plastic. The Wasp is not too dissimilar in shape to the Malta, but let's see how differently it flies. With both of these Wasps side by side, they fly almost exactly the same. The release on the Z Wasp was maybe a tiny bit early, but you can still see both discs flip to flat momentarily before fading out. Honestly, not far off of the Malta, but those having a tendency to flip to flat is maybe not quite what I'm looking for, because I want this mid-range to be able to withstand a headwind, and any lack of torque resistance is probably going to put me off at this point. Let's move away from Discraft now and onto Discmania with the Method. Rated at 5503, the Method has that same shape on the wing as the Malta and the Wasp. And like the Wasp, we have the Method in two different plastics today. Neo, which is a semi-translucent premium plastic, and Exo Hard, a stiff mid-grade plastic. Let's see how they fly. The Exo Hard Method came out slightly nose down, but flips to flat and holds before a minimal fade, while the Neo method flies quite a bit more overstable than the XO Hard, and way closer to what I'm looking for. However, I'm just not a huge fan of how the method feels in my hand. I don't know if it's the shape or depth of the rim, but it just doesn't quite fit. So the method is not going to make the shortlist, and let's move on to the Reptilian Disc Golf Gila. We had the Gila in our first impression series where we explored Reptilian Disc Golf for the first time. And once again, there's not much wrong with the flight. It might get a tiny flip to flat, but then a nice smooth fade. And once again, the Gila, through no fault really of the flight, is not going to make my list because I just don't really like the feel of it in my hand. So let's move on to what is probably the best selling disc that we're going to test today, the Innova Roc3. And we have the Roc3 in 3 different plastics, beginning with Halo Star. Halo Star is, of course, Innova's most popular premium blend these days. We also have it in KC Pro, which is a very stiff, slick mid-grade plastic, and XT Galactic, a swirly mid-grade plastic that's just a tiny bit softer and grippier than KC Pro. In XT Galactic, the Roc3 quickly gets a slight turn and just holds that turn for nearly the whole flight, which is definitely not what I'm looking for. But what about KC Pro? And it's a similar story to the XT Galactic. It flips up, holds a little less turn before eventually fading out. But that drift to the right is definitely not what I'm looking for. Finally, let's see that Halo Star Roc3. And I will say I didn't quite get this as flat as I would like, but I knew before I threw it that the Halo Roc3 would be plenty overstable. And honestly, the Halo Roc3's flight is pretty spot on for what I'm looking for, but it's not going to make my shortlist. And you might find that surprising, but let me explain why. Now, call me crazy, but the Malta, Roc3, Gila, Method, and finally Wasp all have a very similar design. A sharply curved rim with a bead, and all I can say is it's just not for me. The only reason the Malta ever made it in my bag in the first place was because it was a little bit smaller. But why do I take the time to show all these discs if I kind of know that I'm not going to like them? Well, obviously the Roc3 is hugely popular, and this disc shape might work just fine for other players. So while it's not my preference, there's clearly some flights in there that could work great for you if you like the feel in your hand. Let's move on then and see if we can find a shape, feel, and flight that works for me. And next up is the Legacy Badger. Completely different from many of the discs we've seen so far, the Badger is a flat top, small diameter mid-range rated at 6 speed, 3 glide, 0 turn, and 3 fade. And I'm a big fan of the flight. You can hit it hard, it's super torque resistant, but it also doesn't fade so aggressively that you can't get any distance from it. Plus, this pinnacle plastic feels really nice. So the Badger is going to make the short list for now, and let's move on to the Cybertruck itself, the Discmania Mutant. Rated at 5304, by flight numbers alone, it's the most overstable disc we're likely to have. And by actual flight, it's the most overstable disc we have. So by any metric, it's the most overstable disc we have. And it's off my list, because it's the most overstable disc we have. Anyways, now for something completely different. Let's see a pair of discs from Doomsday, starting with the Desolation in Toxic Waste Plastic. Now, the Desolation is interesting. At first glance, it doesn't look like it should work. It has a very similar bottom to the old Roc3, Wasp, or Method that we tried earlier, but the top mold is huge, and overall makes the disc way bigger in my hand, which actually feels kind of nice. Rated at 5502, the Desolation flew great, holding straight ever so briefly before a smooth, gradual fade. So I'm surprised to say that the Doomsday Desolation is going on the short list, even though it smells horrible. How about the other entry from Doomsday then? The Scope. Rated at 4402, my initial reaction to the Scope was that it looks weird. Feels weirder, but flies pretty good. Actually flew pretty nice though. I'm honestly not really sure what to make of the Scope. It's such a weird shape, and a weird, feel in the hand. The plastic is super soft and rubbery, but it flew okay. So I would say it's a solid disc, but I don't think it's going to make my shortlist just because that hand feel isn't quite right. Next, for the exact opposite of rubbery, it's time for the Alpine Hemp Magnolia from AGL. The Magnolia is a 5-speed mid-range, rated with 5 glide, no turn, and 2 fade. And this Alpine Hemp plastic is board flat, stiff, but still has a pretty nice grip. But how does it fly? Well, it doesn't stay above ground level for long because the Magnolia is beef. It reminds me of old Looney Tunes characters where Wile E. Coyote would run off a cliff just to realize where he was and then suddenly start crashing to the earth. Magnolia flies off the cliff, suddenly realizes it's in the air, and then plummets with a huge fade. That being said, though, the flight's not far off of what I'm looking for, so the Magnolia is on the short list. Up next, we head southeast from AGL's home base of Northern California to the plains of Texas. It's time for the Mint discs, Mustang. The Mustang is a popular mid-range for Mint discs, rated at 5502. And this is one of those examples where flight numbers only mean so much. For me, in this eternal plastic, the Mustang gets a lot more turn than I'm looking for. But it does eventually come in with a nice fade at the end. And I'm a bit torn because the Mustang looks great, it feels great, they've got a ton of plastic varieties that are all made by MVP, which is super appealing, but that flight is just not quite what I'm looking for, so the Mustang is off my list. And let's head north from Mint discs to Kansas and Dynamic Discs with the EMAC Truth. And because we're also working on a video with a bunch of different Trilogy plastics, we happen to have the EMAC Truth in 3 different blends: Lucid Ice Glimmer, Lucid, and finally, Fusion Orbit. All 3 of these are rated at 5502, but Dynamic says that the Lucid Ice plastic should be a little bit more overstable and also a little stiffer than Lucid. Let's begin with the Fusion Orbit EMAC Truth. With a slight breeze blowing, you can see the EMAC Truth bouncing along in the wind, and then turning quite a bit more than I'm looking for from an overstable mid-range. Meanwhile, the Lucid EMAC Truth comes out with a tiny bit of anhyzer, but quickly corrects that with some generous low-speed fade. Not bad at all. So what about this Lucid Ice Glimmer plastic? Well, as advertised, it's the most overstable of the 3. And I'd say of the 3, it's the only one that's going to make it on my short list. From one Trilogy brand to another, let's take a look at the Westside Bard. We have the Bard in VIP plastic, and we know all about the Bard, as we put it up against 3 other overstable mid-ranges in our Disc is in the Details series some time ago. But even so, I've never actually thrown it myself, so let's see what it's got. And wow, the Bard is very overstable. With flight numbers of 5403, I didn't really know what to expect, other than that it's much more overstable than most of the discs we've tested. So if you're looking for a really, really beefy mid-range, the Bard is up there on that list. Up next is one of the discs we tested against the Bard in that video, the Discraft Buzz OS. With the exact same flight numbers of 5403, we have the Buzz OS in ESP plastic, which is honestly not my favorite. It looks incredible, but I often feel that it's just too slick for my hand. But either way, how will it fly? Well, that slick plastic comes out just a little early. I struggled to get the release I was looking for on any of the throws with the Buzz OS, honestly. But it is super overstable. But it's not what I'm looking for. Up next, another disc that's manufactured by Discraft, but bears someone else's name. It's the DGA Quake. And while we can't really see the profile view because black disc on black backdrop doesn't really work, maybe it works with my forehead as a backdrop. There we go. The Quake is rated at 5303 and is actually a disc that I've bagged before. And this flight shows why. A nice stand-up before a nice fade is exactly what I was looking for. The Quake is definitely a contender and is going on the short list. And now on to our last disc from Discmania, it's the MD5. This is actually the Overstable midrange that I've been bagging lately, which should tell you everything about its chances in this video, because honestly, I don't like it. Now, it does feel great for forehands, but there's not a single disc in the world that's going to take my yarn out of my bag, and the yarn flies better on forehand than the MD5. And as you might imagine, I don't really like the backhand grip, or else I wouldn't be needing to do this video. But nevertheless, let's see how it flies. And seeing as it shares the same flight numbers as the Mutant 5304, it should come as no surprise that it's just too overstable. And while the flight here looks pretty good, it traveled a good 70 feet less than what I'm looking for. Only 4 discs remain, and up first is the Luftdiscs Silicon in Supernova plastic. And this is the wild card here today because honestly, this is the disc that I want to replace the MD5. So let's see if it can do the job. Rated at 5403, it looks good. And as you can see here, it flies good. But it's sad because I'm afraid to say the silicone is just not for me. I really like the feel of the plastic. I really love the look of the Supernova blend, but it just doesn't fit my hand, which is one of those things that you can't really understand until you get your hands on a disc and feel it in your hand. It's just like the rim is a little bit too shallow. There's something about it. So as much as I want it to be on the short list, it's not. So with that bitter disappointment, let's see if the Clash Discs Mango is any sweeter. Rated even more overstable at 5404, the Mango's profile doesn't really make you think it would be that much more overstable than anything else we've tested today. But the Mango's flight numbers are pretty accurate. As you can see, the Mango doesn't have much glide, a really big fade, and probably just a bit more juice than I'm looking for. Which brings us to our final 2 discs, which you might be surprised to learn are both from Prodigy. Now, Prodigy gets a bad rap these days, but I try to have an open mind, so let's take a look at the M2 and then the archive. The Prodigy M2 was only the second Prodigy disc approved by the PDGA. It actually used to be called the M3, but they changed the name to keep their stability ratings consistent. The ratings for this one are 5402, and it has kind of a similar look and shape and feel to that Doomsday Desolation from earlier. And here in Prodigy's 500 plastic has a nice mix of grip and flexibility. Off the tee, the M2 resists flipping up, but doesn't fade too aggressively either, resulting in a smooth, overstable flight. Not bad at all, so I'm surprised to say the Prodigy M2 is going on the short list. Which takes us to our final disc, the Archive. Developed in partnership with 2023 World Champion Isaac Robinson, Prodigy says it occupies a slot in their lineup between the M1 and M2, rated at 5502. It's designed for accuracy and reliable overstability. We have the Archive in 400 plastic, which is also slightly flexible, but with more grip than the 500 blend. And how does it fly? Well, with the tiniest flip to flat, followed by a nice, smooth, but big fade, it looks to fit exactly what I'm looking for. But you know what they say, twice Earth luck. And with a touch of hyzer, it holds that angle nicely for a smooth, overstable flight. Not dumping out, but not flipping up either. So I'm really impressed with the Archive, both in feel and in flight. So it's going to go on that short list, and it's high time that we start to narrow that down. Our short list is the Discraft Crystal Flex Malta, Legacy Pinnacle Badger, Doomsday Toxic Waste Desolation, AGL Alpine Hemp Magnolia, Dynamic Discs Lucid Ice Glimmer EMAC Truth, the DGA Proline Quake, the Prodigy 500 M2, and finally the Prodigy 400 Archive. Let's quickly narrow this down then. The Crystal Flex Malta, it's out. I know when it starts to get warmer, this gummy Crystal Flex plastic is just going to be too flexible for what I'm looking for. But if you are looking for a more overstable Malta and you don't mind that added flex, this new Crystal Flex one is definitely going to be on your list. The Legacy Badger has got to be out, and that's simply because, again, it just doesn't fit and feel well in my backhand grip. No hard feelings. It feels great on forehands. Now, the Doomsday Toxic Waste Desolation feels great, it flies great, but once again, this plastic is just super gummy and flexible. And I think in the warm summer months here in Ohio, this is just not going to get a clean release. And there's only so much chalk to go around. Also, it absolutely stinks. Next, the AGL Alpine Hemp Magnolia. And this is kind of the opposite issue to the Malta and Desolation, where they're too soft. This thing, it's just stiff as a board, and it's a little bit too shallow for my backhand grip. So Magnolia is out. And that leaves us with the EMAC Truth in Lucid Ice Glimmer, the DGA Proline Quake, the Prodigy 400 Archive, and the Prodigy 500 M2. And I'm going to have to give the win to the 400 Archive. All four of these discs flew fairly similarly, but if I have to pick just one, I'm picking the one that feels the best in my hand, that gives me the most confidence when I'm out on the course, and that just has to be the 400 Archive. This Archive is going straight into my bag for my first competitive tournament in 3 years, I think, which is actually happening 2 days after this video is released. So, wish me luck. And I'm not too worried about being competitive. I'm just excited to be back out playing. For those of you that have watched our channel for a while, you know I've struggled with some elbow injuries. I even had a pretty nasty fall 2 weeks ago, which I was concerned was going to put me out of this tournament, but we pulled through and we'll be there. And if you want updates on how that goes, let me know in the comments and I'll share it on our community page. Remember, if you like the look of any of the other mid-ranges you saw in this video, you can find them on our website in our From Our YouTube section for 10% off. What do you throw for your overstable mid-range? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what flight numbers or slots we should explore next. Remember, flight numbers don't matter. You don't know a disc until you throw it. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. And yes, I have a cold, but never mind that. But why am I throwing the discs and not Caleb, who typically So only 4 discs remain, and up first is the Luft discs. I forgot the name. All 3 of these are rated at 5502, but latitude, excuse me. There's clearly some flights in there that could work great for you if you like the feel in your hand. Oh man. Come on, cough drop, do your job. Oh, there's going to be a lot of coughs. If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible.